Okay, class, let's welcome Cash to the stage.
Raise your hand in this room if you remember the Google blackout last year in protest of SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act. Okay, for those of you who don't know about SOPA, it was an act that was presented to Congress in an effort to stop online piracy, things like downloading music illegally or anything along those lines. How many people, raise your hand in this room if you've ever downloaded a song illegally? Okay, that's what I thought. Under SOPA, basically what would happen is it would be a lot easier for corporations to sue you for downloading that song illegally, take you to court, get a settlement. A lot of people saw this as, and that's just one aspect of it. It also would have dramatic effects on how information would flow throughout the internet and make the internet a lot less free-flowing for information and less democratic as a whole. And so a lot of critics saw it as a very naturally undemocratic bill that would hurt our institutions in this nation and abroad. Thankfully, it didn't pass, and that was largely because of the support or the opposition of American citizens against this bill. Raise your hand if you know what NAFTA is. Okay. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. It was passed in 1994 under Bill Clinton, and it has had a lot of effects on this country since then. NAFTA encompasses Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And one big thing about NAFTA that a lot of corporations and Wall Street really is proud of is that it made corporations a lot more dynamic and a lot more capable of competing in the global market. This is for a wide variety of reasons, but I'll get to that later. One of the main things that NAFTA did is that it broke down a lot of the regulations that held back international trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. This includes tariffs and subsidies for a lot of different products. One thing that was not unsubsidized, however, was American wheat, like corn and grain. And so what happened is right after this was passed, because there were significant less tariffs in Mexico, cheap American corn and wheat flooded into the Mexican markets. As a result, thousands and thousands of poor Mexican farmers that relied on these products to survive had to leave their farms and travel to cities or the border. What resulted was a huge blitz in factories all along the Mexican border called maquiladoras. These factories are known for their environmental degradation and their exploitation of these workers. An effect of this failure to treat their workers well has been that a lot of these workers decide they don't want to work for these factories because the wages are too low, and you know what, right across the border, they can get a much better wage. So another interesting impact of this bill has been that immigration has almost doubled in the years after this bill was passed. As a result, obviously our systems such as our police forces, our education, our social security have come under a huge burden because there are all these unregistered users of the system. Another unsurprising effect of this, because wages are so low in Mexico, manufacturers have unsurprisingly moved a lot of their operations to Mexico. As a result, over 700,000 jobs have been lost, 80% of which are in manufacturing. One thing that this does is it creates a big problem for unions. Right now, unions have significantly less bargaining power in terms of what they negotiate. And raise your hand in this room if you know what unions have done for this country. You have the 40-hour work week to thank for unions. You have your 2-day weekend. You have all your benefits, health insurance. All the good things that we take for granted now were because of unions. And after this passage, it's a lot harder for them to say, you know what, we want a fairer wage, we want better working conditions, because you know what, a corporation can say, okay, bye. We're going to China, we're going to Mexico, we're going to Canada, where they won't oppose us as much. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you know what the TPP is. See, that's not a surprise at all. TPP, also known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is a trade agreement being negotiated in secret between 12 countries, including Australia, Japan, the United States, Chile, Peru, basically 12 major countries along the Pacific Rim, as well as 6 and it has the advice of 600 corporate advisors. This trade agreement is unsurprisingly undemocratic, and has a lot of critics. The only reason we know about it is because Edward Snowden released documents about it in 2012. And from what the critics have said about it, there are numerous nicknames. It's been called the son of SOPA, NAFTA on steroids, and the corporate Trojan horse. It would affect 40% of global GDP and 25% of global trade. The bill, or the trade agreement, encompasses almost the entirety of the SOPA, something that we as American citizens already agree we do not want. And it also takes huge chunks out of a lot of the regulations that we value as American citizens. As a result, there would be significantly less environmental protection for our country. It would allow corporations to come into countries and much more easily create pipelines, start digging for oil, frack, something that I think we can all agree is not something that we want. It also allows these corporations to dump waste a lot easier. There's also significantly less food regulations. So imagine everything the USDA does for you. Make sure that you don't get sick because it makes sure that most food does not have toxins or is produced in sanitary conditions. If this is passed, that goes away. Additionally, there is a safeguard. So if we as a country pass this law, then corporations, if we as a country, as a democratic society, decide that, you know what, we don't like this particular aspect, we're going to change our laws so they don't accord with this treaty. Corporations can sue a nation, a sovereign nation, to change their laws for damages to their stockholders because they could not make a profit because of this change of law. To me, that sounds like corporate tyranny. Additionally, the final kicker is that analysts have discovered that if this is passed, the wealth distribution in this country would take a major hit. Not only 10% of the profits, all the profits would go to the top 10% of our country. It would actually have a negative effect on the income of the bottom 90% of our nation. Something that we are dealing with already that has been a huge issue, as was brought up in the Wall Street movement. I ask you as citizens of this country to inform yourselves, start conversations, and get people educated about this horrible, horrible trade agreement that threatens not only to destabilize our democracy, but to hurt you on an individual level as well. Thank you.
Okay, questions and answers. Go ahead.
What steps do you think we can take besides informing ourselves to prevent the TPP from ever passing?
Well, in the past, there has been this thing called fast track, which would allow the president to sign treaties without congressional approval. This was the case in 2007, and then